everybody, and welcome to tonight's We'll Talk with Artists. My name is Martha Campbell, and I am the MFA's Exhibitions Manager. If this is your first time with us, welcome. Maryland Federation of Art is a visual arts nonprofit, and our mission is to create meaningful connections in the community through art. One of the ways we're doing this during quarantine is to hold digital discussions like the one we're all about to have. I'd like to introduce the host of our show, Will Scott. Will Scott is an art historian with an extensive career as a photographer and the recently retired head of adult programs for the National Gallery of Art. Will is on MFA's board of directors and is uniquely qualified to help bridge the gap between artists and the public. Our guest tonight is Barbara Stubbs, a multimedia artist from Florida who works with bronze and found objects, creating sculptures, prints, and paintings.
First of all, thanks to all of you for listening in, and especially the familiar faces. We must be doing something of interest because you've come back a number of times. And secondly, thanks to Barbara Stubbs for agreeing to participate and allow me to ask her questions, not all of them canned or pre-planned. So I think that the first thing that I want to say, though, is that this has been a lot of fun for me to do, because it's allowed me, and I hope all of you who listen in, to get to know members of the MFA better, get to know them a little bit more as people as well as artists through this electronic medium. The other thing that's been especially fun, though, is that I get to choose the artists that I talk to. And today with Barbara, we're starting a sort of a new chapter in this series, because Barbara lives and works in Florida. She's one of the members of the Maryland Federation of Art that not only doesn't live in Maryland, but lives far afield. And so we will talk a little bit at some point about why she chose to affiliate with an organization so distant from where she lives and works. Of course, we're all familiar with interview programs, and they tend to have a certain sort of format that's universal, you know, like ask the artist to say something about themselves and maybe to talk about their education and thus. In Barbara's case, I thought about not doing that because I find her work very interesting and varied and very connected with things that are happening in the world around us. But then I thought, no, I think there's enough that's unique about Barbara's background that I want to share, get her to share a little bit of that with us before we begin. So I already mentioned that she lives in Florida, not in Maryland. She teaches, and she's completed her education in a number of different places, including Vermont. And since I love geography and love travel, I'm going to ask you first, Barbara, you live now in Florida and work there. Why did you go and get your, I think it was your MFA in Vermont?
Well, thank you, Will. And first, I'd like to thank the MFA and you for this wonderful opportunity to share with the community. In answer to your question, I actually utilize art quite a lot for travel. I adore to travel and use it as an entree for a discussion. When you meet someone, you have that in common. So it's not that out of the ordinary for me to travel for an MFA or to enter a show. And actually, I guess it also piggybacks on the fact that my father was a military career. So I'm used to the world.
Yeah, well, that's interesting that you said that, because I've always been the same way. And when I started to get serious about photography, every trip I made, professional or personal, was another opportunity to see new things and have new experiences that might find their way into my art. So did Vermont leave any kind of impact on you or impact you at the time that you were studying in a significant way in your work?
I do love that part of the country. I actually have a master's degree also from Dartmouth. So there's a certain calmness, a certain aesthetic to that part of the country. It also influences me as far as museums and just entree to new worlds and ways of looking at things.
Yeah. So can you just say a little bit more than expanding on this theme of, where you've studied and lived and traveled? How did you decide to become an artist? Was it something that began in childhood, or were there particular experiences or teachers that pointed you in that direction?
Well, I did draw a bit as a child, and I did return to botanical illustration when I was an adult, but it's a travel story how I returned to become an artist full-time. My husband answered a worldwide search and worked at the University of the West Indies. We lived in Kingston, Jamaica. And because we were brought by the Jamaican government, it's similar to here, where as an immigrant, I wasn't allowed to work. So I used the time to paint full-time. I was a plein air painter at that time and would climb mountaintops or go down to Port Royal and painted full-time.
Wow. Do you still do that at all? Plein air painting?
Well, no, because then when we came back to the United States, I decided to return to school and get my degrees in art. And the sculpture department hired me as the studio tech. I worked as the studio tech for 10 years, and we had a foundry. So that's when I was able to start pouring bronze. And when you have an opportunity to pour bronze, it's just such an exciting development, creating the maquette and working all together, and the focus of a hot fire is just very intriguing. So it's a lot of fun to pour bronze. So I did that. Leaping ahead to how I started the prints then was, it's very hard to move sculpture around to shows. Very expensive to move. So that's when I started printmaking, was something smaller and easier to move around.
It's also interesting to me that you mentioned the way you encountered bronze casting. I got my master's degree at Florida State, which you probably know has a very substantial art and studio art and art history program. And one of my very first students as a college professor or teacher instructor was a woman who was a bit older than me, and she was sort of going through something like you just described, and she was doing bronze casting. So she invited me to the foundry, along with some of the other students in the class I was teaching, to watch. It's such a demanding and challenging thing. And as an art historian, I know how much preparation goes into it. And you mentioned the expense. Are you still doing bronze figures of any substantial size?
I actually do more with found objects. Like I use the bronze and assemble it with objects that I've found, because I think found objects also bring their own story to your work. And so I think you'll see when you see my work, a lot of them are things that I found, and then I add the bronze to them.
Well, that's an unexpected segue to the images that you and I have prepared, you particularly selected at my request. And now I'm going to do something that as an art historian is very unsettling. I want to ask for the last image, Martha, which is one of your most recent pieces, correct, Barbara?
Yes, and I have it here too.
Oh, okay, that's great. So maybe we can get a sort of a double whammy out of that. There we go. When I saw this, Barbara, I have to say that I was excited and mystified. Excited because it seemed so evocative and so powerful, but a little mystified because I wasn't quite sure of what I was looking at. So now I'm going to be the host, moderator, interlocutor, and not the art historian. Would you tell us all a little bit about this piece, what it is, and how it came to be, and what it represents?
I'm so glad you picked that one, Will, because it is the most recent piece. We have started going back to the Foundry in the month of June, mostly because we have a new building that's opening, and I'll have something in that new building when it opens in the fall, hopefully. And I was driving in my car and had the pile of masks and tissues and wipes that you have these days to avoid the COVID. And they were all tangled together. And I was going in to do a bronze casting, and that was my face mask. I'll show you here.
Oh.
I bronzed my face mask.
Well,
You can see the little stitch marks. So what that is, then what the installation is going to be is that's a green sheet to look like a hospital sheet. And I took 2 interns, and you dip the sheet in plaster so that it'll stand on its
yes.
own. And then it'll stand there like a shroud holding this mask.
Okay, so there's nothing inside it. It is literally self-supporting. There's no armature or anything inside.
Well, right now there's an intern inside.
Yeah, well, but there won't be when the...
There won't be, no.
Yeah.
It'll be an empty, the sheet will stand on its own once it's been dipped in plaster and will stand.
Yeah, and the mask itself that is in bronze, how
Yes.
did you translate that from the mask in cotton or whatever fabric into bronze? Can you quickly describe that process for the listeners?
Yes, and actually you'll see also in the slides, there is one of the process in case people are curious about it. I put 3 regular cotton masks together so it'd be thick enough to go ahead and invest in the kiln. So you take the cotton mask and we put it in a canister and pour plaster all around it.
Right.
And then you take that canister and turn it upside down. You have the wax that you filled it with, you turn it upside down in a kiln, the wax melts out. And in this case, it was the cotton of the face mask burn away. And so you have an empty negative space that is flipped over then, and you heat bronze to 2000 degrees and pour it in the empty void space. It fills in. And then you remove the plaster and you're left with the bronze.
Yeah, so it literally is a variation of the lost wax process that you employ.
It is the lost wax it is exactly lost wax. In this case, though, I took it right from life. I took it right from instead of making a wax mold of the mask.
Well, before we move on, that description made me think of an old saw, if you will, or trope, or whatever would be a more contemporary word. And I'm thinking of Michelangelo and other sculptors of the Renaissance and later periods. And to sort of go with the concerns and discussions, topics that we are concerned about today, they all thought that sculpture was a very masculine art form that women were not able to attempt. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, it's almost humorous in our sculpture department about going to the other part of campus. Our fingernails are not always clean.
Well, good. I'm glad you didn't let any kind of old stereotypes or social barriers keep you from it, because I think this is tremendous. I wish I could have the opportunity to see it in person, because I think this is very powerful. So let's continue with what we're doing, Martha, but if you can go back to the first slide. There's a little delay, everyone. That's why I say something, and then there's a little bit of time before we see the next image. So please be patient. Now, when I saw this, Barbara, I immediately thought that it looked like something from Western Central Africa. But of course, it's a contemporary piece, and I could not read on my own whether this was a head covering or a particular way of arranging the hair. And then, of course, the dragonflies, that I couldn't tell whether that was meant to be jewelry or literally those were dragonflies, and this was a human face as it appears to be. And so tell us a little bit more about this, and maybe now that everybody's seen it up close, Martha, if you'll move to the next slide while Barbara speaks.
All right, this is actually called Queen Bee. It's my response. I had just come back from living in Kingston for a number of years, and actually had survived a level 4 hurricane. So I'd lived there for 6 months even before meeting another American. So I was pretty ingrained in the culture. And this was my response after coming back. It's actually a student from the Bahamas who created a face mold. Her crown is made of dragonflies. And the reason why I use insects so much in my work is it was an early professor who related that the concept of an insect can relate to transition or transformation. So that's why you see so many insects in my work, that it's alluding to a transformation. Or I also think they animate the work. They're lively to have them. She's installed on a column, actually from South Tampa, but it's the front porch column, which I think is reminiscent of the colonial columns.
Yeah.
Wrapped around her is a burlap bag from the coffee sack from the Blue Mountains in Jamaica, and it's bound with a rope.
Well, that's fascinating. I love the way that you've incorporated these different kinds of materials in creating this very personalized work of art. But can I extrapolate from something you said about insects and transformation? Of course, I'm not secure enough in my scientific knowledge to say that all insects go through a metamorphosis or not, but we know that most do, at least most common ones do. So is art for you a metamorphic experience for you as an artist and for us as viewers of your work?
Well, I think life is a metamorphic experience.
Oh, well said. Yeah, I don't think we need to explore further. That pretty much gets right to the nut of it. And thank you. So what would you, when you are placing this on view in the gallery space, or as we're looking at it now on the screen, what kind of reaction would you hope that we had to it?
Well, I guess my hope is that you would feel some power from it, that it's a positive image with her crown.
You know, here's where sometimes my background as an art historian, I think is useful. I hope all of you do too, in the sense that, you know, David Smith and a lot of mid-20th century sculptors were very concerned with this idea that any upright three-dimensional object suggested the human figure. So because I had that rattling around in my head, do you mean this to be seen as a human figure, or is the head, the life cast of an actual person, more of a symbolic or metaphoric part of this construction?
I can see where you could read it as a human figure, particularly because the binding of the burlap around would imply hips. But it's more, I was more focused on an image of overcoming this column, this colonial his background.
Yeah. Well, thanks for saying that and clarifying it for me, because I definitely have no hesitation in grasping that as soon as you said it. And I think given the time, I hope I might have come to something of that nature myself. But yeah, it does have that immediate message or character as a human-like arrangement of parts. Martha, let's look at the next slide. Barbara and I had an interesting discussion the other day when we first met over the internet and talked about this. And I think the sort of practical, real life story of how Barbara created this object is one of those fascinating tangents in the world of art. So Barbara, if you want to tell us, however you want to begin, what this means to you symbolically and aesthetically, or specifically, that's a pile of seashells, right? How did you get them?
Well, first of all, I have to preface everything with, this is the most fun I've ever had installing a work of art. There's nothing quite like putting a life-size canoe in an art gallery for fun. Um,
Is that an
so,
actual canoe or is that a bronze canoe?
no, that's a found object. That's a real antique used canoe, full size.
It has a great patina and color even in the slide. So that's a great choice, I think, aesthetically on your part. But say a little bit more. Tell everyone what you told me about how you got all these seashells.
All right, well, the work is called Culture Clash. So we have an indication of humans and it's clashing into the natural world. And I wanted to create a pile of seashells. So my idea was to go to restaurants and collect all the shells from Oysters Rockefeller, like have 3, special restaurants, and I go to them every week and collect their shells until I had a huge pile of them. And happily, what I found out, when you go to the restaurants, the ones at least in our town, or the ones that I went to here in Florida, collect their shells and recycle them to create artificial reefs. So it's a wonderful reason why I wasn't able to do it that way.
Well, so what do you have? There are obviously many different kinds of shells. Where did you get them? Are they all bleached? Because many shells retain their color for years and years. And if they're bleached, why did you bleach them?
I bleach them because they smell like seafood if you don't bleach them.
So it's an accident that you have these bleached white, formerly living creatures with this dark product of human craft paired together. That's purely an accident.
No, that was what I planned.
Oh, okay. So okay.
That was my plan. And then if we could just look at the next slide. Martha, could we move to the next slide? The detail, of course, I had to put an insect on it to indicate or to signal movement and transformation. Also, you can't quite make out, but in the canoe is also a found antique paddle and some antique line.
Well, Barbara, I'm very struck by the fact that these 2 works that we've spent a few minutes with each one, you have a characteristic group of forms and ideas that you're able to combine in different fashions with, I believe, great effectiveness and even some significant power and impact. So I really am struck by your work, and the more you and I talk and get to know each other, I think it's very impressive work. Let's talk about one of the prints before we go on to a couple of other topics I want to cover before we get to the Q&A.
All right.
Stop right there. Martha, go back to that. And Barbara, could you just explain a little bit what's going on there, and then we'll move forward?
Well, I put this in because it was a good transition piece. I have a found workman's box. It's called Explorer's Box. And this was thinking about, there's a magnifying glass and a journal and a fly rod, but it's actually a transition. I have some natural science prints that I'd made. And so I put them in there. So I thought this was a good transition between the 3D work and going into the prints.
Okay, before we move on, is this a work that you would present in the gallery as we see it here?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that's
already.
Good transition. Martha, if you want to move on, please. Thank you. That looks like a millstone. Is that what that image is intended to be, Barbara?
Would you want how I did it secret, or do you want my intention?
Well, you can start with how you did it.
That's a CD.
That's a CD.
Which I have screen printed. So I had a background and a CD. The work is called Dreaming of Japan, and it's actually in the collection at the Awagami Paper Factory in Tokushima, Japan. They were running, again, a worldwide exhibition for different ways to use their paper, which is used for money and screens. And so the work is called Dreaming of Japan, because I created this and sent it in and it got accepted.
Oh, terrific. Well, congratulations. That's wonderful. You not just have your work exhibited in Japan, but it's in a permanent collection there. Uh, what was the music or what was the content of the CD, and did that have any relationship to the image?
No, it was all form. It
Yeah.
was rounded, had a hole. It reminded me, I think there are a lot of circular images, even in the Japanese, in the flag of
Uh-huh.
Japan, and colors. So I was just
All
being,
right, let's continue on then, Martha. Okay. Uh, the next couple of images, Barbara, if you would, just tell us a little bit about them, and when you're ready to move on, just ask for Martha to do that.
this one is Moonrise. Again, you see the familiar red circle, but this one was Sheen Calais, which I was fascinated with for a while because I like monoprints. I like the idea of taking things and smashing them on paper and running them, and it creates a work of art. And so this was Sheen Calais that you could add paper to a print.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Next one. And this one is Longhorn Beetle.
I love this one. This is just such a strong and playful, but also very dramatic, I think, visual image. This is, I really think this is terrific.
Wow, tell me more about that.
Well, I think it's because as the first thing, of course, is the image of the insect. And it's just, that's the actual appearance of the insect, and those long antennae just create such a dramatic shape. And the way that you have the pale insect against the deep, intense red. And then as an art historian, and my special area was 20th century American painting and sculpture, at first when it popped up on my screen, I thought, is that a riff on Barnett Newman? For me, it has multiple layers, which every good work of art should. It has multiple ways it connects with its audience. Now, is that the last of the prints?
I think so.
Okay, yes. Well, why don't you just go back to the print, Martha? It's just a nice sort of visual note for us to hold while we talk about a couple of other things. And so would you say a little bit about your teaching? And does your teaching influence in any way your own work?
Absolutely, and I hope it does. I hope my work influences my teaching. From my experiences with my students, I think it does. I teach form and idea, which is the way you create art, and also the idea behind it. I think art is making thoughts visible, and I try to have experiences for my students so that they're more comfortable with thinking about art and talking about art and creating art that makes their ideas visible.
So would you say that if you had the option to stop teaching, would you do that, or would you continue because you find that it helps you think about your own work and helps your work evolve?
I will say the students' work keeps my work contemporary. If they're creating digital work or what their thoughts are, it certainly keeps me with what's going on right now and thinking in new ways about my work. As far as would I stop teaching, we all are facing that really hard challenge right now with the health of the world.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess the last thing that I wanted to ask, and it's not something that I've been asking the other artists about, but I think one reason I wanted to invite you and others who live further away from Annapolis is this. If you could just say a little bit about why someone in Florida, how did you learn about the MFA? Why did you decide to become a member and participate in our exhibitions?
My father had 3 tours of duty in the Washington area, so that's part of, for an Army brat, that's home.
Yeah.
And both of my children live in Washington. I was in Annapolis for a holiday and stayed right across the circle in the Governor Calvert House and walked across the Circle, to visit the Circle Gallery, met some of your people, went on your website, and just fell in love. The gallery's gorgeous. The people are gentle and kind. They're have beautiful aesthetic sense. It just was, it seemed like a place I would be extremely comfortable.
Well, thank you for saying that, Barbara. And for all of you out there in the world who are listening, the MFA welcomes you wherever you live. So at least participate in our exhibitions. Well, Barbara, it's been really interesting and stimulating to talk with you about your work, which as I learn more about it and see more of it, I'm even more impressed. But I'm sure our audience has a lot of things that they're curious about. So let's open it up to questions if you're okay with that.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, so if you want to speak, raise your hand or unmute yourself, and Martha will control who gets to ask questions and participate. I think I saw Jack's hand first, Martha.
Yeah. Barbara, I have two questions. When were you at UVM?
2015 to 17, maybe?
Campus has changed. Well, I graduated in '68. It's totally different. We had elm trees everywhere, and they all died from the Dutch elm disease. All of a sudden, the campus became lakefront property. We couldn't
Dear.
lake from campus.
Yeah.
But that's a whole other story. I wanted to talk a bit about the process of pouring bronze into a mold. I'm a retired dentist, an orthodontist, so I'm used to casting. We always used centrifuge to cast gold and other precious metals. When you have a complex mold that you're pouring into, how do you keep from getting bubbles, as it were? Do you have to use?
You tap the side.
What?
You tap the side. Like if it's in a canister like this, you tap the side to.
You're still only using one sprue to pour in. You don't have multiple ones to get the air out.
Well, you have side sprues that come out, like wax sprues that come out.
Okay. And so you do have several of them with a more complicated. Okay.
Yes, for a large one, absolutely.
You might want to explain to everybody what a sprue is.
You create a channel to lead out to the air. It is created out of red wax that looks like licorice. And I'm trying to think, Jack, you can help me with this. We also use to make molds. What's the pink stuff that you make braces out of? You can only use it one time.
Are you talking about alginate?
Yes, we use alginate.
So alginate is what we use. You've all had the wonderful experience of going to the dentist, having put a tray of goop in your mouth. So like, if, God forbid you got a crown, that the initial mold that we use is called alginate. It's made from algae, and it's very fragile once it's
Exactly. You can only get one image from it.
If anybody out there is listening and having trouble visualizing what Jack and Barbara are talking about, just Google lost wax process, and the internet's full of all these pictures of it. Almost looks like when you break the investment off, right? Correct me if I'm saying this wrong, Barbara. You'll have the figure, the object, and then you'll have all of these things that look like little wires sticking out. And you break them off, and then you have to file them down and create the surface, the finished surface that you wanted.
You've done this before, Will, right?
Yeah, time or two. Other questions? Somebody else? Nancy, was it Nancy had her hand up?
Nancy, you're muted.
You have to unmute yourself.
I would love to go back to the second Japanese print. I thought it was extremely powerful and beautiful. But Barbara, you said you use material. Is that more a two-dimensional? Is that how does that work? I thought that was incredibly beautiful and powerful.
Would you all like me to pull the image up again?
That's probably a good idea, Martha.
It's the second print in the
With the
Japanese
sheet
that
plate,
one.
yes.
Yes. Is that, I mean, I can't discern what it is from looking at it. You said it's material?
No, actually, it's all paper. It was, it's Japanese paper that I ran through first and through screen printing and with a dark pigment, and then I ran it through with the to create the red circle. Wait, no, first was red, and then I kept the circle on there and did the black, and then I ran through with marbled paper, and it was just a happy accident that it became so transparent because I did it while it was still damp.
It's incredible. It's absolutely beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you, Nancy.
Okay.
Well, the others too, but this one strikes me as really an important work. Very, very important. Thank
Any
you.
other questions? I thought I saw a couple of other hands up. Just so we give everybody a chance to be sure they can be heard and ask their questions. One time I was in Japan on a business trip for the National Gallery, and I was in Kobe, and I got up very early. You know how your sense of time gets a little out of whack, and the sun had just come up over the Kobe harbor, and it was that red disc. You know, there was enough sort of smoke in the atmosphere, and it was like, this is the land of the rising sun for sure. But you've captured that and done much more with it, the way you combine the materials and colors. Maurice, did you have a question?
Yeah, so the prints are screen prints.
Yes.
Okay, and then you did on that one that you were getting complimented on, then you did Sheen Calais on top
Yes.
of that. Okay, through the press.
Yes.
Through a press, yeah. Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Okay, anyone else?
Betsy, I think you were next, so if you want to unmute yourself.
Unmute, please.
No? Okay, sorry.
Oh, okay. All right.
I actually have a question, if you don't mind, because I think your bug motif is really interesting, and I don't think you and Will talked about it all that much. But I love the way you said about Will's question of metamorphosis. It's really interesting to me. But I'm wondering about that connection then with certain pieces that you implement that motif into, specifically the one with the canoe. You said it was something to do with, you just wanted there to be some sort of motion involved with it. How does that reflect with what you said earlier about like life is a metamorphosis?
Maybe thank you, Martha. Maybe I'm identifying with it. I feel always open to growth, and maybe I need to put a little bit of that into my work. So maybe it's autobiographical.
Thank you. That's a nice response. I was just thinking about how interesting it is that it appears in all your different mediums too, like everything from print to sculptures and the work that goes into making delicate little dragonflies like you do. It's beautiful.
Yeah, that's a good observation, Martha. Thank you. Maurice looks like he has another question.
Maurice, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay. About the canoe and the seashells. When I saw that, I think of a Native American archaeological site, okay? Because very often, particularly I grew up in Brooklyn, and there were the Canarsie Indians, and sites have very large shell middens. And that's a comment. Then the question is, did you start with the idea of canoe and seashells, or did you find a canoe at a low price or whatever, and then decide what to do with it?
I think they happened together. I think work kind of grows together. And once you have your materials, you have to figure out how to put them all together. But there is a reference to a missing. You're right.
Yeah.
I live in Florida. They have them here too.
I have a very pedantic question, and since I don't see a lot of other hands waving, maybe this will be our last question, if you will. Are there any contemporary sculptors that particularly interest you, Barbara?
El Anatsui, Dohosa, Nicholas Cave.
Martin
So-
Puryear?
Sorry?
Martin Puryear?
Perhaps, yes, I teach him also.
Yeah. I see certain ways that you handle materials that made me think of him, and your palette to some extent in your sculpture, if you will. So that's very serious company, and I think you seem to be comfortable there. So unless there are other questions, I'm just going to say, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I want to make sure you know, we have visitors from Florida and also from London on this call.
Oh, terrific.
So you're international now.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's great. That's good. And you are, of course, also. So thank you for bringing the international visitors to us. And thank you for participating. I think this has been, for me, a very interesting conversation. And I hope someday you'll be up here and be an in-residence member of the MFA, and we'll be able to meet at exhibits or some other activities. So again, thank you all for attending. Thank you, Barbara, for participating.
Well, Will and Martha, thank you so very much. And all of the MFA, thank you so very much for hosting me. I appreciate it.
Hey, Will.
All right.
Well, before we run off, Martha's been very quiet about it, but the new summer member show is up, right?
That's tomorrow. Summer members show opens
That's
tomorrow at the
So
gallery.
the gallery will be open tomorrow.
All right. Thanks for bringing that up, Jack. And thank you all again. Enjoy your evening.